What on earth compelled you to do 7 Ironman distance triathlons on all 7 continents?
Saw nobody's done one on 7 continents. And I just said, you know what? I don't know how physically, mentally, financially, logistically I'm going to do this. I'm going to commit. So I was like, in that moment, I said, no matter how long this takes, I'm going to go all in on my goal. I think people see this physical feat and they say that's incredible, but I don't think people realize, like, you know, you're the athlete, you're the marketer, your logistics, partnerships, you're a one-man team trying to figure out everything.
Water temperature, do you know? 1 degree, I'm assuming? Celsius?
Yeah, -1 degree. It's just me surrounded by penguins, whales, seals, right? It's like icebergs. You feel so small. Just moments of pure physical and mental torture throughout the 32 hours. All these warm blankets and jackets around me. And I was just like uncontrollably shaking. And honestly, I was pretty scared at that point because like I've never experienced my body in like that state before.
Connor, how are you doing?
Fantastic. Good to be here, Fergus.
Great to have you. And I think the only question I can really start with is what on earth, literally, what on earth compelled you to do 7 Ironman distance triathlons on all 7 continents? Something that has never been done before until very recently by yourself.
Yeah. I mean, some people think I hit my head, but, to me, I think I've always been fascinated with people that are trailblazers, have done something that's never been done before, and just thought, you know what? Let's go for it. I thought, I wanted to do 1 Ironman because a friend of mine did it, and I thought it was impossible. And then I did it in 2020, and that led me on this quest around the world. So just think we need more trailblazers, more people that, think differently. And the perfect name of this podcast is The Modern Minds, more modern minds.
Fantastic. So where does that desire to be a trailblazer come from? Because I think we would all love to be trailblazers. We'd all love to be pioneers, but it's one thing believing that and seeing it as a good thing. It's another one to do it on the scale on which you've done it. So is it something that was instilled in you by parents? Is it something that sports taught you? Where do you think that seed was planted?
Yeah, I think just like growing up around really talented people. I have 2 older brothers. They're both, athletes and competitive. So I was always the youngest of the 3, trying to stay up with them, and, played 3 years up in hockey and had this drive to just be as good as them. And then from like early days in high school doing cross country, I was racing against a friend of mine, Justin Knight, who went off to be Canada's fastest 5,000 meter runner. And I was just like, you're surrounded by greatness and people that are doing these cool things. And I was never the best, but I thought, what could I do to separate myself and just like think differently? And there can only be one, fastest person in the world. There can only be one Justin Knight, but there's also an opportunity to be, one and only of something else, and just got to get creative on that.
So where did the actual tangible action for that begin to manifest for you? Because it's one thing thinking that, and it's another doing it. So your transition into making that happen, was it a conscious decision, or is it just something that happened by accident through years of doing things you're enjoying?
No, I think it was a conscious decision. So, I grew up playing high level sports, hockey mostly, and then decided to pursue a business degree and hang up the skates. And that's where I kind of felt lost. It was like, what am I going to do now? And that's where I started trying out for random teams. One of them was the triathlon team, the rowing team. And long story short, I ended up, making the triathlon team. And that's where it was all short distance, but I was racing against this guy, and he went off and, did an Ironman and came 14th in the world for our age group. And I was like, what the hell? Like, if you can do it, why can't I do it? And I think that's where the seed was planted. But that was 2015. And I have this text. It was Christmas Day. I texted him. I was like, by 2020, I'm going to do my first Ironman. And it was just always in the back of my mind. I was working for a beer company. I was a social guy. I was just like trying to balance life. And then I had this desire of doing what I said I would do and just going all in on this thing. So in 2019, I quit my job, moved to New Zealand, and gave myself 6 months to just train for this Ironman. So that's kind of where the whole kind of seed was planted.
Why did you wait 5 years?
So I was in university and I was working for a beer company, and I was just like, you know what?
Which one was it? Was it InBev?
Yeah. So
It was okay because
Budweiser.
I did Heineken's grad scheme, so at this point I've been conditioned to boo you. I'm afraid. Sorry.
There we go. There we go. But I was just like, you know what? I want to have a good time. I think these are like pivotal moments in your life where you got to be around good people, enjoy where you are, and like, you know, the program was tough. It was just like all new for me. So I just thought, you know, let's enjoy it, have fun, work hard, try things, see if I even like triathlon. You know, I tried it for a year and then I actually stopped because I was like throwing up in the pool because I was going out with the Budweiser crew the night before. And then um, 2019 kind of rolled around and I remembered, you know, like that I kind of texted this guy and it was always in the back of my mind. And I was like, if I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. And so I just Googled like the best triathlon in the world. And New Zealand came up and I just said, I don't know how, but I'm going to go there and do it. And sure enough, both my brothers wanted to do it as well because we're competitive, and they came down and we all did it together, and that kind of sparked the fuse.
So what were the harshest lessons that you learnt in round one? Because it sounds like you're an experienced athlete. You'd already learnt some pretty harsh lessons by throwing up in the pool. That's always going to change a man. And first Ironmans, I mean, I remember my first one was in Lanzarote, which is probably the least advisable first Ironman to do on the whole Ironman circuit.
Yeah.
But I was faced with doing that or Bolton, which is a town in the UK which isn't known for much other than the Ironman. And I thought, you know what, I don't really want to associate myself with Bolton any more than needs must. So I'm going to go to Lanzarote and do that one. And did it on 4 months prep, coming back from an MCL injury. So it wasn't optimal, but got through it and was a very different person at the finish line. So what were the realizations and the lessons that you learned from that first process of becoming an Ironman?
For sure. I think the biggest one is how tough it was. You know, I just kind of naively went into it. It's like I joined a local triathlon club, and I was pretty tight for money of it moving there. So I just memorized the training and then, you know, left and did all the training on my own because I couldn't afford just to be a part of the membership club. But it was like just showing up day in, day out for so long. I thought, this is a true sacrifice. So one of the lessons was like how much you actually have to sacrifice in order to accomplish what you want, and the ability to say no. And I was like such a yes man for all my friends, always wanted to go out. I was like first one to put my hand up, let's do it. But then, you know, being able to say no was a huge lesson. And then on the actual race day, you know, like I never actually swam 3.9 or 8 kilometers before the race day. So I was like shocked getting in the water. I was like halfway through. I was like, oh, I hope I can make it to the start of the bike. And then nutrition was probably the biggest one. It was like my brother, I thought, you know, looking up to him, I was like, he's probably got it figured out. He brought 12 Build-A-Bars, like protein bars. And he's like, if we eat one of these each hour, we'll be all right. So there's like literally pictures of us carrying these 12 Build-A-Bars in our pockets. And after the first one, I was like, I can't eat any more of these. Like my mouth was so dry. I just threw them all out at the first aid station and just winged it based on whatever they had on the course. So I think just lack of knowing what you were getting yourself into was a crazy lesson. And just learning by doing, I think is a great superpower in itself too, of just like learning as you go. You can only read so much, but you got to learn by doing.
Agreed. One of my, I think it was episode number 2 on this podcast, actually, Gaz Banford, former Sergeant Major of the SBS, which is the Special Boat Service here in the UK. He has a simple phrase, which is being experienced is experiences times 1,000. And you can't cheat your way there. You can't buy your way there. It's just reps and exposure. And that's why I guess a lot of ultra endurance cliches is all about just showing up continually and just exposing yourself to the demanding things where the lessons are to be learnt, which I think marathons, Ironmans, recreational events like this really do a great job of instilling in people in an otherwise quite ordinary world. I guess it's a great way to have control over exposing yourself to demanding things within a sort of recreational setting, which will carry over into positive manifestations in your day-to-day life. But you decided that just simply doing that was not enough, but not without a big obstacle in the way first and foremost, which was New Zealand being essentially probably the peak of media coverage in terms of how to handle a very specific period of our lives. You were there when that all kicked off, weren't you? And I can imagine riding the high of, wow, I've done my first Ironman, I feel great, I'm so happy to be here, and the world shuts down. So talk us through what it was like being there for that.
Yeah, so I remember it like yesterday. It was March 7th, 2020. That's when, Ironman New Zealand, Cloud9, finished your goal. And then 10 days later, it was St. Patrick's Day, and the world shut down. We were in Queenstown, just kind of celebrating, having a great time. And then the next morning, everybody, it was like, I can't get back to the UK, freaking out. And it was actually the first time I've ever had like a panic attack or anything like that. I was like, I don't know what's going on. Like, what do you mean? Like, the world is shut down? And long story short, I was stranded in New Zealand for about 60 days. They had emergency flights sending people back to Canada, but it was still kind of, being navigated. But that's really where the silver lining came in all of this, was like my job became redundant there. I was just forced in isolation. I was like, what am I going to do? And I started reading about this girl from Australia that did an ultra marathon on 7 continents. And I was like, and became the youngest person in the world to do it. And I was like, wow, that's pretty amazing. I wonder, has anyone done that for Ironman? Saw nobody's done one on 7 continents. The youngest youngest on 6 continents was 32 at the time. And I was 23. And I just said, you know what? I don't know how physically, mentally, financially, logistically I'm going to do this. And I just thought it was the flu. I was like, I'm going to commit. So I was like, in that moment, I said, no matter how long this takes, I'm going to go all in on my goal. And that's kind of where it started. Probably the worst time to start this big audacious goal, because for the next year and a half, the world shut down and like every race was canceled. And I just had to create my own races to keep me motivated, and, designed all these my own challenges around Vancouver and in different parts of Canada just to like stay motivated. But as soon as the world opened up, I went all in. I did 3 in 3 months. I did Chattanooga, Tennessee. 2 weeks later, I went to Mallorca, Spain. And 3 weeks after that, I went to South Africa. So I just went all in, and I said, you know what? There's never going to be a perfect time to go after your goal. So stop listening to everybody around you. And if you have an opportunity, even a small one, to make it possible, do it. And just found a way to make that.
Amazing. And I will admit at this point that this conversation is somewhat bittersweet for me, because this has been on my black book, my iPhone note list for a while as something I'd like to achieve in the future. And then I saw your reel pop up and I thought, fuck. It kind of takes the scale of the logistics and the draw away of getting an Ironman done in Antarctica when the opportunity to be the first isn't there. So maybe at some point I'll do a marathon, but I think I'll say at this point, I'm going to leave the 7 Ironmans and 7 continents to you. I think if the temptation to be the first to do it isn't there, I'm going to remove it from my iPhone notes. But I think the congratulations that is in order for actually, I don't want to sound like that guy sipping, let's say, Budweiser for the sake of your previous career in the corner of a bar being like, well, back in my day, because I would have done that but it has been in my iPhone notes. And It's now gone from my iPhone notes because it's been done. So... You snake, Connor. You snake. I'm joking. But the point there is really, as you've exactly said, is that I wonder how many years I could have had it sat there and not gone after it because it's so big and intimidating. Like you've said, that essentially if there's something that's exciting to you and there is a way of making it happen, which there probably will be 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100 even, let's improve the odds. It's simply a case of just accepting that there never will be a perfect opportunity, perfect time. And if it's something you're passionate and curious about, then go for it. Because again, I could have gone 10, 15, 20 years with nobody else having attempted it and had it there as I'd like to do this at some point. Which is interesting. Obviously, we'll get onto the logistics and the demand of why. It's probably something that'd sit in the notes for a long time rather than being something that you do on a whim. But yeah, I was really, really excited to see that somebody had done it, because knowing on concept how much planning and preparation will have gone into Antarctica as a concept, because I did look superficially probably 18 months ago.
Yeah.
Deep dove, made some calls, started thinking about it, and sort of thinking, nah, it's one for the future, not for now. So when I saw somebody's actually made this happen, this is awesome. So I think selfishly, I'm keen to understand a bit more of the logistics and the practicality, because 6 in 6 continents, huge achievement. Doing it as the youngest person ever, huge achievement. But that's not really what we're here to discuss, is it? That's not the cherry on top of this cake. It's Antarctica, and I know that's where obviously a lot of the focus has been from a messaging and narrative point of view. With Chasing Antarctica being the website, being the narrative that you're pursuing, and it's on the hat.
Yeah.
Yes, correct. So, at what point did you decide, I'm not doing 6, I'm doing 7?
Yeah, I think the idea was like when I read the Jackie Bell Australian girl do 7, it was 2020, right? And I was just like, wow, that would be amazing. But obviously there's no sanctioned race in Antarctica. So I thought, let's break this big goal down. I have to do 6 first, and then, maybe tackle that. But it was kind of just this seed planted. And then I'd say, after the 5th, it was kind of becoming more real, and I was like, okay, I have one more to do it was in Brazil at the time. It was the final one in May, and I was like, the infamous question is always, what's next? And I thought I should start looking into this, like see if it's even possible. And I tried so hard to try and make it possible for that year in 2023 or end of 2022, and like I just couldn't figure it out logistically, financially, and we'll get into all of that. But I just couldn't make it happen. And I just thought, like, I can't give up. I have to keep working towards this and just put it into the next year. But as you know, it's like a short weather window, only like 3 to 4 months for Antarctica summer expedition kind of time frame. So that gave me like a whole year to kind of like really kind of nail it down. And as we get into it and it unfolds, it didn't even come together until the last couple of weeks. So it was, planted in 2020 and then started to blossom, I guess, in 2022, and then realized in 2024.
So there's so much that goes into it once you're actually boots on the ground. But in summary, I guess the challenges you need to deal with are the fact that Antarctica is a highly protected area.
Yeah.
The access is near impossible, which means permissions.
Yeah.
The fact that there's geopolitics involved is something that doesn't really need considered with other self-sustained endurance events quite as often, unless you're crossing boundaries in certain parts of the world, I guess. But where did you begin? Who was the first person you phoned? What was the first organization that you phoned to get the ball rolling?
Yeah. So like this whole journey, I think people see this physical feat and they say that's incredible, but I don't think people realize, like, you're the athlete, you're the marketer, your logistics, partnerships, you're a one-man team trying to figure out everything. And it was like, I didn't have any mentors or guidance on like how to do this. It was like, how is this even feasible? So many cold calls, random emails. Long story short, I called this guy named Doug Stout. He's been to Antarctica, I think the North and South Pole, more than anybody on the planet. And just, he picked up my call and he was like, what are you trying to do? I was like, this is what I'm trying to do. He's like, that's fucking awesome. Like, I want to help you realize that. And I think that's the biggest gift in all of this, is believing in somebody to make it possible, make it happen, right? And to have somebody like him believe in me just set this fire under me of like, okay, let's work on this. And seeking the guidance from him, and then I ended up getting these 2 mentors, John Ragg and Elizabeth Modal. John Ragg is a legend in the Ironman world. He's done more Ironmans than anybody on the planet, 273. What's amazing about his story is he's 73, did his first one when he was 38 years old. So it's never too late. And his partner, Elizabeth, most for female, 109, I believe. And they, after my first Ironman, I connected with them, and they just like took me in as like their son almost. They were just like, what you're doing is amazing, and we we can't tell you how excited we are for you, and just keep going. Like, and I think that's what kept me so into this journey. It was like these amazing people that wanted to see me win. Because at a lot of times, you know, you want to quit, right? It's hard. You don't know what's next. You don't know like how your body's going to hold up, how you're going to get sponsorships, all of these things. Like I lived in 10 places in 18 months, and I was just like, I don't know how the hell this is going to happen. But yeah, he was the first phone call. And we worked together for over a year on trying to make it possible, and connected with the Chilean government on permits, and went back and forth. And that's kind of where it started.
What were the biggest hurdles, the things that required the most back and forth, the things that you felt were insurmountable in many ways?
Yeah, I think working on other people's timelines, there's only so much you can control. You know, we were working with the Chilean government for a year on getting permits. And, you know, we got a special permit to like operate. And then later on, like it got kind of revoked because there's this concern of the wildlife and the avian flu. And, you know, I actually tried to go with a group. I flew to Chicago to meet like this marathon group that was going down. And there's 6 people that were all trying to do a triathlon. And we are talking about how we can make this possible. They were all going to fly in and, you know, piggyback off the marathon and the logistics. And, you know, at this point, I'm talking, this is December, and I did my race in February. You know, it's like 60 days out, and we still don't know how we're doing it. And then, you know, I realized like it's still such a shot in the dark going with this group. It's like there's a time constraint. They don't know 100% where the swim is, et cetera. And then I started thinking like, you know, how else can we do this, and how can we get a flexibility window here? And that's where the sailboat kind of came into play. And I was like, shit, I got to find a sailboat, and I got to find one in the next 30 days, or otherwise this isn't going to happen. So I called every single like tour company, sailboat operator, charter. And then one guy was like, hey, like, I love what you're doing, but we can't take you. But I know this guy, like, Instagram guy who's like looking, he's a photographer looking to go to Antarctica and has connection to a boat. Maybe you can contact him. I was like, give me his contact. I'll contact him. And he picked up, you know, my phone call. We jumped on a phone. He's like, you know, I'm trying to go, but we don't have enough people to go to make it possible. I was like, I'll bring the people. Let's do it. And that was in January. And I was like, okay, I got to get to Ushuaia and find the people, the budget, and like everything to make this possible in like a 4-week window.
Are you happy sharing what the budget required was?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still still working on it, but it was expensive. It was, you know, upwards of 50 grand for Canadian for like the Antarctica, you know, sailboat, and that doesn't take into account, you know, the countless years of effort and time from my side,
Yeah.
and sacrifice leaving a job to go all in on this. And but yeah, we're super, you know, grateful to have amazing sponsors and partners that jumped on and believed in the project and helped make it possible.
But the reason I ask is just to really hammer home the scale of the demand and the work behind the scenes to make something like this happen, because it's not just jumping through procedural, geopolitical, and permit-related hoops. It's then, okay, once that hoop is jumped through, fuck, how are we going to pay for this?
Yeah.
I think the bigger projects, I mean, I've never had to commit to a project to that scale in terms of budget. I think that the most we've ever had to work to was around the 15 mark, and that was an absolute slog to get to, and was in many ways easier to make happen. So it's I can feel your pain to some degree, but that was ultimately what put me off. And ultimately what puts me off projects of this, I'm quite happy. Like, I don't know. I'm a little bit, maybe I'm comfortable. Maybe I'm just being a wet wipe, but there's a lot of things on home turf in the UK that I want to achieve before I start thinking too far afield, just because of reducing friction, and the friction of Antarctica is the reason why it hadn't been done before, in simple terms. But you overcame that friction. So the reason I ask is because people will be wondering, because there's ballparks for how much it costs to get up Everest, to get thrown around, but nobody has a clue how much it costs to do an Ironman in Antarctica. And now we know that the boat to get you there is the way that you can navigate the window without having to deal with the fuel permits to get a plane in and out, and all of the things that are going on there. So once you had, did the permit to operate include a permit to film, or were they separate?
Yeah, so separate things for everything.
Fantastic.
We ended up,
Perfect. Just what you want, isn't it?
yeah. We ended up, like the budget. I think so. There's one other person that has done something similar, right? Anders Hoffman, a Danish
Yeah.
guy. He did Project Iceman. I think over 72 hours or whatever it was to do it, but he also went by sailboat. So huge respect. He kind of pioneered Antarctica and gave people a vision of extraordinary people.
I'd actually forgotten about him. I'd seen the promo and the fact he was training for it, but I'd never actually saw a. Was he? Am I right in saying he was doing some sort of NFT style release for the video and all that stuff? Yeah, I've been on the website, but so he has done that, has he?
Yeah, he ended up doing it, I think, in 2020 or 2021 or something, maybe just before the pandemic. And yeah, because of the weather and the challenges, it took 3 days, and still an amazing feat, right? But
unbelievable, yeah.
He kind of, I was fortunate to talk to him, and he sent me a nice little video saying, "Congrats on the 6. Can't wait to see what you do next." And I think like that was super cool to have people like him. And I know you wrote it on your note, but you're a big inspiration as well. I followed a lot of your stuff, and the double Ironman, or what'd you call it? The double brutal. That was a great video to watch. And I think what's cool about all of this is like young, ambitious people. You read about all these successful people, and there are a lot of young ones, but it's hard to relate to people that are like much more experienced and have this incredible resume of like life experience that are accomplishing these amazing things. But the people that are just starting in their window, and like it's so much more relatable, right? It's like, oh, you're working full time and you're doing this. You're like trying to navigate all these hardships. It's like much more relatable. But yeah, can't remember the question.
It was just shedding light on the sheer impracticality. I asked about filming permits and whether they were bolted on, and then we went on a diversion. But I think permits, we won't focus too much on permits for the sake of the conversation. People don't need to be as fascinated with the amount of permits required as I was a couple of years ago when I looked at this and then decided to shut my laptop and leave that for another day.
Yeah. I mean, I can say, like we ended up going with an independent sailboat, right? And what people might not know is we spent 23 days on this sailboat, 5 days crossing the Drake Passage, the roughest waters in the world. Literally didn't eat for 5 days. We're puking. It was as bad as people said it would be. And I think like, it's like just to get there was such a journey, right? And by having an independent person who has all the right permits gives you a bit more flexibility versus going with a huge, tour boat or flying in, and obviously allows for a much more incredible experience with wildlife and to absorb it all. And I think, I feel like it was the right way to do it, to navigate from Ushuaia to Antarctica on a sailboat, 15 meters long with 7 people.
So before we break down the climax of this project, which is Antarctica, do you feel that you managed to actually be present and enjoy the fact that you were in Antarctica, experiencing it in the way that you were? Or did you find yourself a little bit too laser focused on the goal itself?
No, I was more clear than I've ever been. It took me 32 hours, but there was no competitors. It's just me surrounded by penguins, whales, seals, right? It's like icebergs. You feel so small. And I was so lucky to have my mom and my brother there and my best friend. So to be able to like not only achieve your biggest dream, but to do it with your biggest supporters, I think just 10x is the feeling of what you're doing. So yeah, I think, there was moments of probably blackout like in the swim. As soon as I went in, I was like, oh shit, this is gonna be hard. Goosebumps. I've never been in water as cold as that. Like just moments of pure physical and mental torture throughout the 32 hours, but super, super present and blissful and something I can, just feel like I can go back to in my mind at any time.
So the triathlon itself, let's break down all the stats. Iron distance triathlon, 3.8k swim, 180 kilometer bike and run. Water temperature, do you know? 1 degree, I'm assuming? Celsius?
Yeah, -1 degree because of the salt
Minus
content.
1 degree. Fantastic. Brilliant. That, yeah, I didn't account for the salt content in my calculation there. That is cold. Oh,
Yeah.
good Lord. And yeah, my irrational fear of sea creatures would suddenly become quite rational, I think, with Antarctica's wildlife. And the bike elevation total, because it's quite hilly, Antarctica, isn't it?
Yeah. So is relatively flat, like the section that we picked. So what I don't know if people know, but I did a 200-meter loop 900 times. So
And I knew it was loops. I didn't actually know it was that small.
yeah,
Oh God,
so
circles. Was
insane.
it like an athletics track? Just
No, it's kind of like a pin. There's like one line with a pin turn loop, and then back, and then same thing, and it's just like in the shape of like a dumbbell or something. And I don't even know, man. It was 21 hours on the bike. But yeah, to break it down, the swim 3 point. We did 3 point. I did 3.9 kilometers. It was about a 600-meter stretch in this cove, and there's just like seals or sea lions just around the cove. And as I'm swimming, we had a boat beside me, a little Zodiac boat, inflatable boat, and it would go back and forth because there was a seal following me. They're not like particularly aggressive, but they're just curious. But still, they're bigger than me, right? And I'm
yeah.
like a pretty big guy, so it's like it's scary when you're in the water and these things come up near you. You can feel their presence. But the swim took me an hour and 43 minutes, which is 43 minutes longer than my other Ironman time, like my best Ironman swim time, just because it was so cold. My muscles were freezing, my teeth froze. Like I went hypothermic afterwards. It was scary.
Was it just black? But like, was it pitch black beneath you, or was there any color coming through from the ice? So I can just imagine that part of the world being as barren and cold and exposed as it is. That water must be terrifying.
Yeah, it was like a dark blue, but yeah, you could see, maybe a meter of depth beneath you, and then just kind of black, and there's just ice and snow. And I mean, where I was in Deception Island, it's an actual volcano island, so it's mostly ash, and it's like an old whaler's bay. But yeah, just so desolate. There's nothing around you other than animals and the boat.
Unbelievable in many ways. Like, we're talking about a triathlon here, which is kind of why I asked at the start if you actually managed to get yourself into realizing what you were doing, because I can imagine you want to be able to just view this as, I'm doing a triathlon, simple as that. Let's break it down so I can get through this. But it's in Antarctica, somewhere that most of the world will never visit, experience, or even really necessarily understand, and you're doing a 9-distance triathlon through it, which is just crazy. So my own selfish fascination with this is huge, which is, I mean, the water terrifies me, terrifies me, because I'm irrational at the best of times. Sometimes, whenever I start open water swim season, I have my moments, and then I settle into it after a few sessions. But whenever I go out and can't see the bottom, my mind plays tricks on me. Even in Scotland, where there is very little wildlife to be of any risk, but my brain tells me otherwise. So, out of the water, how long did it take you to get back to the sort of competence physically to be able to get on the bike?
Just over 30 minutes. So it was practically like hypothermic coming out. Like my body was just in shock, and uncontrollably shaking. And there's this moment, like, honestly, I'll never forget, is my brother like jumped on my body and put his hands, in my hands on his bare skin, to like warm them up. And like the team put my feet in warm water, got like all these warm blankets and jackets around me. And I was just like uncontrollably shaking. And honestly, I was pretty scared at that point because like I've experienced, after drop and cold training kind of swims, but I've never experienced my body in like that state before. Um, and yeah, they just tried to give me like soup and warm liquids just to kind of warm myself up. But I knew like I need to start moving or it's just going to get worse. So just
Yep.
kind of like told them like, let's go like as fast as possible, get me back on this bike. And took about 30 minutes in that transition just to like warm my body back up and change into my bike gear and then start the bike ride.
I can't imagine your bike gear was a sexy pair of Rafa bib shorts either, was it? I can imagine it was a little bit more comprehensive than that this time round. So, mountain bike, fat tires, and covered head to toe. What parts of your body were exposed? I know your face was exposed in the swim around basically. Am I right in saying your cheeks and a little bit your forehead? Was that about it?
Yeah, just under my eyes, above my mouth. My nose was completely covered.
Yep.
So just for your mouth, and we had this this cream that we put on that's supposed to like prevent frostbite from direct water on the skin. And then yeah, the bike, everything was covered, and except I had like a buff and
Yep.
just glasses. So yeah, it was 30 or 21 hours on the bike. Ended up doing a 200-meter loop. And the original plan is the day before I try to map out the best course possible. And it was like about a 1 kilometer loop. So I knew it was going to be a long time and a lot of loops. But after the first like 1 kilometer I loop, I realized like the sand or the ground was just way too soft. Like I could barely pedal. I was just like almost falling over. I was just like, we gotta get smarter here. So I found like a little portion. It was like 100-meter section that was like a firmer from the glacier runoff, like dried up firmer glacier runoff. And it was essentially like, okay, I'm gonna just do this back and forth. We'll set up our aid stations because I'm gonna be going through the night. I already know it. And that was like just the audible I called during the actual race. It was just like, okay, let's just adapt and we'll have our stations for food. And my goal in my brain was like break it down every 10K. I'm going to get off and drink water and refuel and then keep going.
GPS, assuming it was the main metric that you were using, just to keep on top of everything, because I can imagine getting a yardstick was probably off the table. So, how did you have live data, or were you relying on others?
We had live like a live GPS tracker for the swim.
So, at what point on the bike did you realize just how long this was going to take? And obviously they've had your estimations ahead of time, and if you're working to a 1K loop, I can imagine your estimations were a little bit more generous than it turned out to be. So what did you factor for in terms of time on bike versus what it turned out to be? And when did the realization come?
Yeah, I think in my brain I thought I could do it in like 15 to 16 hours, which is a long time, but I knew it was going to be slow. But I was like, I don't even know, 12 hours in, and I was like, oh man, like I'm like just over halfway here. Like this is going to be horrible. And then like as the night goes in and gets colder, it gets pitch black. It's just like, what do you even think about? It was like, what do you even think about for that amount of time? So I just kind of realized like we just got to break it down into chunks and celebrate the small wins and create a system that will work for me and make sure that the crew knows that. And I'm a big, coffee drinker, and I was like, I need I need coffee at like X amount of time. And but there was moments where like you're reliant on your crew, but there was moments where like my crew was fast asleep because they were just like up for so long. I had my brother and my buddy Innes, who's like the filmmaker and capturing all of this. And it was like in the middle of the night. I've been up for 20 something hours now, and we had these two lit like beacons on each side, and one of them went out and I couldn't see anything. And I'm like, yelling. I'm like, guys, I can't see. And they like run over, like they waking up from their nap. And I'm just like, guys, we gotta be on it, you know? And I mean, there's no shade. I'm forever grateful for them and I couldn't have done it without them. But there's these things like where you're just so dialed in that you can't think about your food and if you're
Yeah,
going
yeah.
to have your food there, right? And it needs to be a real team effort.
Yeah, yeah, which is ultimately part of the experience, and that's what makes things like this so valuable. When it's not a race, when you
Yeah.
dream it up, the process and the actual execution becomes so much more valuable because you've created the whole thing. What's nose to tail? It's kind of the equivalent, isn't it? So, bike. How did you feel coming off it?
Oh man. I mean, you know, you've been in an Ironman race and your legs are jello. My legs were just locked. So my left leg, and even right now it's still recovering from it, was just locked. The joints were like completely locked, so stiff. Never had that before where it was like you can barely bend your leg. And I was so exhausted. I just like sat down for 20 minutes. I was like, I just need to like power nap here and refuel. And I thought they were joking when they woke me up again. I was like, what do you mean? I just sat down. Like my brain just like was like, you blinked and they were like, it's time to go. You got to go. I was like, I just sat down. Like I need to sleep. They're like, no, you got to go. So it was just this weird like moment of you're like an out of body experience, right? You've reached this state of just pain and euphoria and like in the same breath I knew that I was 42 kilometers away from a dream I've had for 4 years. So I was uh I was just like overwhelmed.
How did you feel once you got moving? Did you have the usual triathlon transition experience? I already know the answer to this, I assume. The usual triathlon transition experience of a couple of strides, 500 meters, 1K. Right, I'm in my rhythm now. Everything's good. What was I thinking in transition? I feel great. Or was it just torture the whole way through?
It's just torture. I just like it's like my leg was completely locked. It just couldn't even use my left knee. And I was like, okay, start walking, just get into it. And then eventually I created this structure in my brain and it was the same loop. So it was like even more insane. I just biked this loop for 900. Now I got to freaking run it. It was like, okay, I'll walk 100 meters and then try and jog back 100 meters. And that was my system for essentially 30K of the run. And then I was like, all right, fuck it. I need to start changing this up. I'm going to lose my mind, and started running like around the perimeter, kind of along the shoreline. There's a bit of elevation, but I was just like, I don't even care. Like
Yeah.
I'll do it just to change my mindset. Um, yeah.
How did you understand the experience at the finish line? Because it'd be cliched of me to ask, how did you feel? Because destroyed, I can imagine. I can imagine there was probably no emotion. It was just, wow, I'm pretty tired. But from a immediate emotional point of view, did you have any energy left to feel anything? Or were you just overwhelmed by the experience as a whole?
Yeah, I think I was just at my limit and past my limit. So I just kind of so the way the finish line worked, there was a little hill, and I was like, in my brain before it, I thought this would be a great climax to finish, and then I was like, oh no, I got to climb this freaking mountain to finish this thing, you know. But the group, all six of the other people, were stationed at the top with a flag, kind of like to bring me in. And my brother was just like a little bit closer, and I reached the top and I like just collapsed into his arms, and he's like, no, you're not done. It's like another 100 meters. And I was just like, oh my God. Right.
Oh, no.
Um, but go and just like to be surrounded by everyone was amazing. And like I said earlier, I just couldn't help but be overwhelmed with like joy that I could share the moment, you know, that could share it with my brother, my mom, my best friend, and like these new friends that I just made on this expedition. And it felt like just such a family and like a shared experience that like I didn't even think about what just happened with the triathlon. I just thought like I feel so lucky to be surrounded by such amazing people and like have this moment that, you know, was huge for everyone, not just me. It was like to your brother imagine seeing your brother achieve his biggest dream, or your mom seeing your son like achieve your biggest dream. It's like, it's so special and hard to articulate, but yeah, I just collapsed and then slept for 24 hours.
How are you processing it all now? Are there any profound lessons or reflections on yourself and how you want to exist moving forwards that you've managed to unpack yet, or are you still very much in that phase?
Yeah, I think it's something that, I'll continue to pull from as like time goes on and years go on. But in this moment, I think like, you know, everything is better when it's shared. It's great to have goals and ambitions, and I think it's just so much better when you can share it with a friend, a stranger, whoever, right? And have a shared experience. Um, I think the biggest, you know, takeaway in all of this was like it was a huge sacrifice. You have to be willing to, sacrifice things. I came up with this like random analogy. It was like the vitamins that I learned from it, and it was like vitamin NAIL, like nail, and it's like vitamin N is like your ability to say no, right? You have to say no to things, and when you say no to something, you're saying yes to yourself. Vitamin A was like action. You have to take action. If you don't take action, the opposite is inaction. You'll just stay where you are. Vitamin I is just like intention, just having an intention about what you do each day. Before you get up is like, what am I going to do today? How do I want to feel? Who do I want to share this with? And then vitamin L is like laughter. Is just like incorporate as much laughter as possible into the hard things you're doing, and that'll help you get through those hard moments. And that was kind of this just like random takeaway I took from that experience was like, what are the hard vitamins I want from this? And the vitamins I think more people can learn from.
Amazing. I like it. I was wondering whether that was going to be a sort of Jocko Willink style series when he said vitamin nail. I thought, oh, interesting. Here we go.
No,
But no, that was a great way of looking at things. And I think at the core of all this is exploring the world. I mean, you've made a huge amount of sacrifice I mean, moving to New Zealand to commit to a race you're clearly a bold decision maker, but you've been fortunate enough to explore and participate in every continent on the planet in a very unique way. And nobody else can say that, but it means that you have interacted with the cultures and communities of, I mean, there's not much to that in Antarctica, to be fair, but of different parts of the world through sport and through a mission and a shared purpose. And I think that's why this experience as a whole is a really great message as to why just committing to something intimidating and focusing on the journey and the process rather than simply the time metrics or the performance metrics or your fucking power output or whatever people like to really focus on so much is so valuable, because that is where the stories and the memories come from in many ways, I think. Had you got to that finish line without the support and you managed to do it with some strangers that you could rope in from the local base for research purposes on Antarctica, it probably would have been the same. It's the fact that you now all have a unique experience that you can discuss whenever you come together. And that's what makes the time that you did anything in irrelevant. And I think online, triathlon communities, running communities have maybe lost sight of the value of that a little bit more in the past couple of years. I think just because social media is becoming more and more competitive, but times are individual goals. And I think your project as a whole is really testament to how much more there is to the mechanism of a single discipline an individual self-driven sporting pursuit. And I think you'll be a very different person now to you were when you thought the project up the first time. Very different to 2015 Budweiser consuming version of yourself, I'm sure. But it does beg the question, and it is a cliche. Where do you want to go from here? I'm not going to ask what next, because I'm sure you've already got ideas cooking, but it's difficult to peak. It's difficult to go bigger than this in many ways, unless you want to try and do an iron distance triathlon up and down Everest. But what do you want to achieve with your achievement now?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is we're working on a documentary. So the ability to share the lived experience with more people around the world, I think would be the cherry on top for all of this is, sharing the highs, the lows, the the amazing cultures and experiences from the different parts of the world, and the people that I got to meet, and the people that actually helped me make this possible. Couldn't have done it without myself. So, you know, working on a documentary, I think, is huge. And then I think just like meeting other great people, other great athletes like yourself, and dreaming up shared projects, I think, is the next step. You know, the Ironman journey was incredible, but what people don't see is how lonely it can be. You know, not many people want to go and bike for 6 hours on the weekend or run 50K. It's like, you know, what are you, crazy? So doing something where you can share the adventure, share the experience, and share the challenge, I think is kind of what's next, and lift each other up through those shared experiences.
I agree. I empathize with that a lot. I'm not nearly as driven by what I want to achieve these days as previously, and I very much want to try and not necessarily tackle, but bring together people that find a lot of value in singular or solo endeavors, because you can find yourself going down quite a lonely path without realizing it, and then you get used to it. Yeah. You kind of don't really know how else to exist. And it's ironically a very peaceful place to be, but it can, if life becomes quite chaotic out with that, then the sacrifice of social life and time doing this, that, and the other can become potentially damaging. I won't say generally damaging, but it is a lonely pursuit, whatever level you're doing it at. That doesn't need to be 7 Ironman distance triathlons in 7 continents. So if there was one lesson that you've taken from this whole experience, what would it be?
Yeah, I think, you know, people think of triathlon as swimming, biking, and running, but the biggest lesson for me was actually what I call is like the fourth discipline, and that's the mindset. Is by pursuing hard things and intentionally, you know, doing hard things, you're growing your mindset and building your threshold for every element of your life of what you can achieve.
Simple as that. Well, Connor, thank you very much. Really, really enjoyed that, and great to hear the insights of a man I wished I could be some years ago in my iPhone notes. But here we are. Enormous congratulations again. I can imagine you're still in a bit of a malaise, so I will leave you in peace to get thinking on what's next. But before we do that, where is the best place for people to find you, and where should people keep eyes peeled for when the documentary does go live?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, Fergus. Such a pleasure. And, you know, Connor Emeny on Instagram, or updates on our documentary on my website, chasingantarctica.com.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And all the best for the reflection, and then the flip side of that, which will be the silly ideas that you have next, I'm sure. Thank you again.